ask you very quickly to give us the NHS health check on how it is you protect. What are the structures you need to keep an intelligence service alert to the real threats, and I suppose critical of itself? Those are all those stories. I mean, I have to say, Christopher Andrews' book made me feel that there should be a national collective apology to Roger Hollis. I felt it was absolutely terrible destruction of a great public servant.
Also, the other story about Hollis was that he was the first person to suspect Blunt.
Yeah.
You know, Peter Wright turned this against him, said that he'd done it to throw everybody off the scent. I mean, that was the point at which, you know, the sort of preoccupations started sort of spinning, and nobody could see, you know, the wood for the trees. And it clearly does happen. It can happen.
So how do you keep
Yes, but you
independent?
can't have it both ways.
Which way?
On the one hand, the criticism is that the agencies were too lax and they allowed spies to infiltrate them, failed to pick up, and yet, on the other hand, clearly in that case, they were overzealous. They were looking for spies who didn't exist. So you've got to recognise that somewhere there is a balance.
There's a balance
between the two. I mean, as Christopher Andrews' book I think points out very neatly, by 1964, the security service had actually cracked
They caught them all.
the Cambridge Ring of Five, but they couldn't accept they'd solved it. And that was partly right, and it was partly James Eason's Angle and his wilderness of mirrors, to quote T.S. Eliot. And they were so convinced there was more to find. And that, as you say, the consequences were disastrous for us, and indeed for Graham Mitchell as well. I mean, it shook their confidence. So, just while I've got the floor, as it comes back to a question, it's quite interesting, most of what you're talking about wasn't intelligence gathering.
No, it's true, but it's about...
It was a curious thing, what one... Remember that there used to be a cartoon called Spy versus Spy. It appeared in American magazines where there was one agent dressed in white and one in a black coat, and they spent all their time trying to work out ever more ingenious ways of doing each other down. And you can read a lot of the Cold War history in that kind of light. But this is where I use my distinction about awareness. At the same time, there was...
I think you're not speaking to that.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
sorry. Okay, I do apologise. At the same time as this spy versus spy nonsense going on, you actually had intelligence agencies collecting detailed information on what is the hull of the Soviet Alpha-class submarine made of, what is the calibre of gun on the new T-72 tank or whatever. All that stuff that the public doesn't tend to know about and think about was going on. And overall, I think that performance was very good. The big difference between, I think, the Western side and the Soviet Union, or indeed the Warsaw Pact, is that we had more intelligent customers. So when intelligence was provided, it was used, as I think you very rightly point out, not just from Stalin's day, but Gordievsky reported that as KGB head of station in London, he was being asked questions which displayed a complete paranoia and absence of reality in the part of Moscow centre. And he would certainly not report back the truth of what was actually going on in Western society, because that wasn't what Moscow centre wanted to hear. So I think we've been quite fortunate with our customers. The other thing I think worth bearing in mind is that you're right, I think, to point at times in the Cold War to a mindset in the intelligence community which put the worst possible interpretation on Soviet programs and activities. With some justification, if you read Metrokin's two books produced with Christopher Andrew, there were conspiracies. They were trying to subvert democracy. But the big missile gap Remember, it was Harvard historian Richard Pipes who was brought in to be Team B. It was the CIA's whose estimates were dismissed by the US administration of the day as being too liberal. And if you remember Nixon's comments about the Ivy League liberals down at Langley, he hated the CIA because they didn't conform to his worldview. So I don't think you can place it all on the intelligence community. But what you say, I think, about Peter Wright and the impact of getting into a paranoid state of mind is absolutely right. And one of the things that's been done there, Jean, to come back to your question, is that, and Christopher refers to this in his book, that there is now senior external oversight of cases that involve allegations of penetration of the intelligence services.
There's also a person you can go to.
Yes, and there's for issues of conscience, or where you don't want to use the management chain because you may have fears of the management chain, there is now a staff counsellor, again an independent figure that people can go to.